country, both past and present, First National Bank, a Franklin family community bank, proudly sponsors Veterans of the Valley. Since 1862, First National has provided local decision-making and accessibility, as well as banking products and services to Brazos Valley citizens.
Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. Jack Currie is an Aggie, but before he ever entered A&M, there was a war to fight in World War II's European theater. And that's where he and his B-17 crew flew some 50 combat missions in 1944 and 1945, a time in our history that included D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge, and the eventual victory in Europe. He has some interesting stories to tell, but none more compelling than that mission on May the 12th, 1944, when his flying fortress was shot up so badly it really had no business staying aloft, but it did. And thus Jack Currie is here to tell that story and many more. Please welcome Air Force Major Jack Currie to Veterans of the Valley. Jack, it's a pleasure to have you here on Veterans of the Valley, and thank you for your service. You told me you grew up in Lott, Texas, and you said that, like so many people who were in the Army Air Corps, you kind of got your attraction to flying as a child, watching the planes fly over. That's kind of how a lot of people got attracted to the Army Air Corps that way, you included, right?
That's correct.
Talk a little bit about your youth growing up in Lott and sort of that, how that led to your military career. You actually entered the military. You wanted to go to A&M, but you actually entered the military before you even entered A&M, right? Sort of talk about your youth leading up to the military.
Well, as I say, I grew up in Lott, Texas, graduated from Lott High School, and I had aspirations of being a mechanic at least, if not a flyer.
Right.
And I took lessons as a diesel mechanic. And I decided to get experience. Everywhere I went after I got out of the diesel business, they want to know what experience I had. So I figured the only place I'd get experience would be the Air Force.
Right.
So I enlisted at Randolph Air Force Base.
In 1940 you did, actually before United States got involved in the war. You were involved. You went to Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois, and it's kind of ironic, your career almost ended there too, actually, in Illinois also. But in between, a lot of places. Shepherd Air Force Base, you spent 3 years there, put in as an aviation cadet. You were accepted there, and then you went to basic in Uvalde, right?
That's correct.
Right. And eventually just all over the place before you finally got to Europe. Goodfellow Air Force Base, Lubbock Airfield, graduated from flight school and went into multi-engine school. Why multi-engine? Why did that attract you?
Well, I like the safety of more than one engine, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And that turned out to be a good thing, right? Yeah. Because we're going to talk a lot about when you lost a couple of engines. Rattlesnake Bomber Base, that's where you did some of your training also. I had not been familiar with Rattlesnake Bomber Base. That's down somewhere between San Antonio and Laredo, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Monahans, Texas.
In Monahans. Alexandria, Louisiana for advanced B-17. You finally went to England in 1944. Talk about what your job was there as a member of a B-17 crew. What did y'all do?
Well, I went over as a co-pilot and stayed co-pilot until right at the last of my missions.
Yeah.
Before I got promoted to a second lieutenant, first lieutenant.
Right.
And well, that's about the way everybody did, you know. And if they lucky enough to complete the missions, they got promoted.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I guess everybody looked forward to the finishing their tour so they could come home.
Right. You remember the 8th Air Force 499th Squadron, and one of your jobs was actually as a job to drop leaflets. Is that right?
That's correct.
Talk about that. These were obviously propaganda type of leaflets to try to convince the enemy, to try to sway the enemy one way or the other. So
that's correct, and we carried everything from baseball scores in the United States to you name it. And we kept the Germans involved, as well as the occupied people.
Indeed. You told me one time that before D-Day, I guess, you actually dropped leaflets to tell the French to get out of the way.
Right.
Right?
We went over the night before D-Day and dropped leaflets to the French, told them to get
off the beaches.
Cherbourg area there.
Right, right.
And then I say we went back then the day after D-Day and began dropping more leaflets, keep people informed as to what the United States was doing, or the Allies, I should say.
What do you remember about that, the day after D-Day? I mean, looking down, describe what you saw.
Well, in going across the English Channel, I think a guy could have walked across almost on boats. I never saw so many boats or ships going across the channel. And they, of course, were landing on the beachhead.
Right.
Fortunately, we were up in the air and didn't catch any of the bullets or anything that were the poor people on the ground caught.
Did you have a sense when you were doing this, or did you even have time to think about it? Did you have a sense that you were witnessing history, that you were witnessing something that would be such a prominent part of history 60 years later?
Not really.
Right.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
I think as I look back on it, now it was a part of history, and I say I lived through that part of history, and glad that I did.
You were based in England, your whole tour, the first half of your tour at Chelveston, Chelveston, the first part of your tour, and the second part of your tour, Chelveston, is outside London.
Right.
And Chelveston, that was to be so that you could be close to Eisenhower headquarters. Is that right?
That's correct.
Let's go ahead and get to, you had 50 combat missions that
That's
you
right.
flew, and some were more exciting than others. But
Absolutely.
I want to talk about May the 12th, 1944, and that mission. Talk a little bit about what the mission was about and what happened.
Well, the mission was to go up to the northern end of Denmark, and in fact, we crossed Denmark into the North Sea, and were headed home, and thought we were free, of course, of enemy mission or enemy aircraft.
Right.
But
I want to interrupt you because there's one thing that I left out, that your particular unit, you were a night flying unit.
that's right.
So what you're describing right now happens at night, about between midnight and 2 a.m. in the morning. So we're talking pitch black, so people can get a sense of what we're talking about. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I say we had left the coast of Denmark, headed back toward England, and a couple of German Ju-88s who were equipped with radar slipped up behind us, and of course we couldn't see them. And the first guy turned loose with 303s and 50 caliber, and he really disabled our airplane.
Right.
Because he hit number 2 engine and caused it to die, of course. And he shot out all the oxygen in the airplane, and then they shot out all the navigational instruments. So because of the shortage of oxygen, we had to descend rather rapidly.
Right.
You know,
This happened, you were at about 44,000 feet.
No, we weren't that high, 24,000.
About 24,000 feet, excuse me.
And we didn't know how well the airplane was going to fly with 3 engines. We did get the propeller feathered, and we thought we were in pretty good shape. But on the way down, the number 4 engine went out. Number 4 engine went out, and we got it feathered. So we were flying on 2 engines, but with the weight and so forth, well, we couldn't hold altitude.
Mm-hmm.
So we just gradually descended till we thought we was going to go into the English Channel or the North Sea.
Right.
And
now you're piloting now, because didn't you tell me that your pilot, Lieutenant Michaels, had actually gone to the back to
Right.
check on some of the rest of the crew, and sadly 2 of the crew were killed in the attack.
Right.
Your waist gunners were killed in the attack, so he had gone back to check on them, and he said, "Take over." So
yeah, he says, "You got it," and
you're
he
flying
left.
you're flying the airplane now.
So, like I say, on the way down, well, we tried to get rid of. Well, let's go back and say we had a second Ju-80 behind us, behind the first one, and the tail gunner and top turret gunner and waist gunner and everybody else is looking for this guy, and he blew up.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought sure the first guy would come back, you know, and get us, but we never did see him anymore. So
Right.
I don't know whether he got afraid and went back home or what happened, but anyway, we were glad. But we threw out everything in the airplane to lessen the weight and everything that we could cut loose. And we got down to about 3,500 feet before we began holding altitude.
Right.
And we headed what we thought was due west, and we could hit the coast of England somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like we flew for hours and we didn't see a thing.
You told me your compass had been had been destroyed.
Right.
So the only thing you had was just a little liquid compass.
That's right, like you
somebody.
see, like you see on an automobile.
Exactly. Not the most trustworthy thing.
Not very trustworthy, especially if they hadn't been
Yeah.
swung, I guess is the word is.
Right.
And
Correctly. Mm-hmm. So you were just trusting that you were heading to England,
Right.
because this is pitch black, but you're not sure. And you also had a horizon problem too, because of the unit that had been knocked out also, as far as what the horizon
yes,
was.
our instruments were on vacuum,
Mm-hmm.
and the vacuum pump that did the artificial horizon and so forth was on was on engine 2,
Right.
and of course, after the engine was disabled, well, the vacuum was disabled, and we didn't realize that what was happening. You know, everything was pretty cloudy at the moment,
Sure.
and finally, I remembered that we had an auxiliary vacuum pump on number 3 engine, so I switched it over to number 3, and the things began to straighten up. You know, the artificial horizon and everything began to straighten up a little bit.
Right.
But we flew for seemed like a lifetime, and nothing appeared in front of us. And finally, I told the navigator, I said, "Go down and check and see if any of your equipment works." And he came back and he said, if my navigation equipment was not damaged, he said, "you better make a turn to the right about 90 degrees." So I did, and we almost immediately were picked up by the searchlights in England, and these searchlights led the way to supposedly a safe landing spot.
Exactly. Getting a sense of this, again, 2 a.m. in the morning, it's pitch black,
Yep.
and you've got to trust this reading that says go 90 degrees to the right, because you haven't hit land yet. And it turns out what you're doing is you're flying up the English Channel.
Right.
And if you had said no, we're not going to turn right, we're going to keep on, you would have just been out towards the Atlantic Ocean.
That's correct.
Right. So you made the decision to do the 90-degree turn right, and you immediately picked up the searchlights.
Right.
How long after that before you were able to land? You didn't land actually until you got to Scotland, right?
Oh no, we flew all the way up the east coast of England,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought they never were going to let us land. But you know, they finally did give us a clearance to land by a green light, you know.
Right. Now you're on 2 engines. You had finally got it up to about 12,000 feet. Is that right? Is that what the altitude?
We leveled off. I tried to level off at 12,000 feet, but I say
Right.
in order to hold altitude, we were almost at stalling speed,
Right.
about 100 miles an hour,
Exactly.
which is a minimum in a B-17.
Right, right. So eventually you did get to land,
But I say we got down to about 3,500
about
feet
3,500 feet.
and flew at 3,500 feet, just above stalling speed, until we were able to land.
Were you too busy doing your job to be scared, or were you scared?
Well, I guess everybody was a little scared, but
Sure.
Let me tell you, I was busy.
Yeah, yeah.
And because the pilot never did come back, he went back in the back of the airplane and said, "You got it." And so I was in charge.
So you were the man. You eventually did get to land. I think this is a good time to stop and let's look at some pictures, because I wanted you to tell that story before we look at the pictures, because we've got some photographs of that airplane. Eventually it was just pushed overboard, right, because it couldn't fly anymore, but we've got some pictures of that airplane and some other pictures. Let's go ahead and go to some photographs that we've got right now. First off, we have a picture of a B-17 so that people can just sort of get an idea of what we're talking about. That's the Flying Fortress, a very high-profile and recognizable airplane of World War II. A great airplane. Not as big inside as you would look. It looks like a big airplane, and it is on the outside, but you get inside that thing, there's not a lot of room to move around, is there?
That's correct,
That's
especially
true.
with a bomb bay that's big enough to hold 10 100-pound bombs.
Right. They landed a B-17 out at Easterwood a couple of years ago, and I got to get in one, and I thought this is no place to spend a war. Okay, let's move on. I've got a map. This is from Google Earth, and this gives you an idea of what happened to Major Currie's crew. If you see Denmark up on the right side, up on the top part of the picture, that's Denmark, and you were flying this mission actually through Denmark, and you were hit just on the left coast or the west coast of Denmark, and that's where you were attacked. So if you can imagine flying with 2 engines completely across the North Sea down, I guess you were flying sort of in a direction of southwest towards England, but you were actually going towards the English Channel and not knowing exactly where you were, thinking you were flying right into England, but you were actually still over water, and finally crossing there into the English Channel. And I guess it was at about Dover when you made your 90-degree turn, is that right?
That's right.
Of course, Dover is a spot right there that you can see right there at the English Channel. And then had to fly essentially all the way over to England, over to the west side of England where Scotland is, before you were able to land.
That's correct.
So looking at that map, you flew about how, from the time you were hit to the time you were landed, do you remember about how long a time was that? How many hours was that?
About 3 hours.
About 3 hours. No wonder you were busy. No wonder you were busy. Anyway, I want to give people a sense of exactly how long this ordeal was. Let's move on to the next picture, and this is your crew, and You told me that you're the only survivor of this picture.
That's correct. All the rest of them passed away.
And you were standing in the back, the second from the right.
That's correct.
It's a good-looking crew of airmen there, and that's one of the planes that you flew. Now that doesn't look like a B-17. That's a two-engine. I don't know what type of aircraft that is.
No, that's a B-17.
Is that a B-17? Okay. I had lost track of the propellers there. Okay, let's move on. This is from a book that we have written by Pat Carty, and this is your airplane that was shot up, and you can see in the top photograph the flap that has been severely damaged.
That's where the main damage was, right behind number 2 engine.
Right behind number 2 engine, right there at the flap. And in the bottom picture, you can see the fuselage, which has been heavily damaged.
Unfortunately, we had 2 waist gunners were killed, and the radio man was hit once, and the tail gunner was hit twice. The ball turret gunner was hit 3 times, but they all survived.
But you did lose 2 of your crew.
That's right. We lost the two waist gunners.
2 waist gunners. Okay, let's move on. This is a sample of the kind of leaflets that you dropped. It's obviously in German, and I don't know, my German is non-existent, and yours is not that good, so we don't know exactly what this leaflet is saying, but that's just sort of a sample of the kind of leaflet that you were dropping right there. Great photographs. Talk about the landing in Scotland. I don't want to get away without talking about that, because that was quite exciting too, right? The landing itself was, talk a little bit about that, because you didn't know it, but actually your tail gear, your tail prop had been shot out also.
Right.
So you didn't know what kind of landing it was going to be, but it turned out to be pretty rough, right?
Well, the ball turret guns were left pointing straight down, so we knew they were going to be the first things that hit.
Right.
And we landed on PSP planking, which is steel planking with holes in it. Some people might be familiar with this, but they used it for runways, particularly in real wet areas where fighter planes were landing.
Right.
And it's kind of risky business to land a B-17 on a PSP planking, but we managed to land as quick as we could get to the edge of the airfield.
I imagine, yeah.
And then it sounded like the airplane was falling apart. I said we knew the gun barrels were going to get bent on the ball turret.
Right.
But we didn't know the tail wheel had been shot off.
Right.
So what we really landed on was the tail and the ball turret.
And the next day, when it was daylight, that was when you actually got a chance to first go out and get a look at your airplane. And when you looked at it, you thought you had no idea how you were able to get back. Is that right?
That's right. The props had holes in it. The cylinders on the engine had the fins knocked off, and we wondered how that engines kept running, but they did.
Indeed. Weather, whenever I've talked to flyers, they've always told me that the things that they feared the most in the order would be the enemy would be third, second would be mechanical problems, and first would always be weather. That was the thing that concerned them the most, is the kind of weather. And you flew in some pretty dicey weather in your 50 missions, right?
We certainly did, because and on 2 particular missions we took off, and they told us there'd be no place in England to land when we got back. This kind of makes you think, before you take off.
That's right.
But on one mission we finally did land up in Scotland, and another mission we landed down on the very south end at a naval base.
Right.
In England. So we made it back safely on both of those missions.
We're starting to run out of time, and there's so much more to tell. Of course, your you did fly 50 missions, but I want to go ahead and get you home because you had such a career after you came home. Sort of talk a little bit after you finally got home, and I know that you got out, but then you got back in again, and then you had a career at Texas A&M also. So sort of wrap up a little bit after you got home and sort of take us to your retirement in 1962.
Well, I got out because I had enough points to get out.
Right.
They were about to send me to B-24s to fly. I mean, B-29s to
Right.
fly out of the South Seas.
Uh-huh.
And I told them, well, I'd had enough combat that I believe I'd just get out. So I did.
Right.
And I say I worked for the VA for a while, and then when Castro acted up, I got recalled, and I went into SA-16s, which is a flying boat
Right.
for rescue, and I stayed in the rescue outfit for a couple of 3 years and flew from Japanese airfields mostly
Right.
into South Korea and down to Iwo Jima, wherever we might need to escort an airplane that was.
Right. I know your career took you to Guam, where you helped clean up after a typhoon that was in Guam, and eventually your career. I said 1962. You actually finally retired in 1982. Actually, an 18-year career in procurement here at Texas A&M, and quite a career. Colonel Currie, we're out of time, but I want to thank you very much for your service, and thank you for telling the story. And glad you made it back.
I am too.
I know that you are. Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you.
Through the grace of God, Jack Currie lived to tell about that flight in May of 1944. He and his wife Ruth have been married for 66 years, and our thoughts are with her and Jack's family as she battles Alzheimer's disease. Jack and Ruth have 3 children, several grandchildren, even great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, all of whom have reason to forever be proud of this airman of World War II. We salute Jack Currie for his service and salute all veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.